to cycle through them. So I hope that's helpful.
Let's see.
Yeah, we are going to start in just a couple minutes. So I know it's top of the hour, folks are trickling in, but I need to communicate with my co-chair. And so, yeah, court's indulgence. It'll take just a second. Okay, I don't see Sophia online, so I believe we can go ahead and get started. Just checking the chat one last time. Okay. So I see, Daniel, you're going to take notes in the hedge doc. I appreciate that. We're asking if others could jump into that to take notes, so thank you. I don't have anyone on the ground, sorry. So I apologize
can help
for that.
with taking notes.
Oh, thanks, Maxie. Yeah.
I have the hedge doc open in front of me, so I cannot do that for my own presentation, but
of course,
I can join the note-taking team after.
Awesome. We tend to only take notes for the discussion. Since this is recorded, it goes on YouTube, and folks can check that out later. So let me officially open and get started, and then we'll get to your talk. So I'm going to have you take your videos down just for a moment, because I'm going to be showing slides. So welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to the last session slot of the day. Really excited, and the speakers are excited to be joining us, which is all so fantastic. So you'll have to, there we go. Yeah, you'll have to excuse me for being a little out of sorts. It's just really early in the morning here in DC, and I need to be able to bring up the slides, which I am unable to figure out how to do. Oh, here we go. Okay. There we go. So apologies, these are out of date slides. We don't have 122 slides, but I need to show you the important things like the note well. So it is the end of the week, but it's very important for anyone watching or folks who've attended today that you read this note well. This mostly has to do with intellectual property concerns in the IETF, and that you're aware of them and that you are doing your best to follow them. And then as well, we also have code of conduct in the note well. So it's important that we have a collegial environment where everyone is respectful of one another, and you should know all of that. So I also have a few housekeeping for folks that we are recording this session. It will go up online. You can choose to type in your questions to the chat. Someone can read them out for you. If you are joining in person, you also need to join the queue with your phone. So please sign in by capturing the QR codes that are sprinkled around the room. Let's see, what else? That's how using the Q in Meet Echo is how I can see that you want to speak. If you want someone to read out your chat message instead, you can type mic in the chat and followed by your question. And yes, please only send audio and video when you are speaking. Anything else? I think we're good. So these are all somewhat out of date links, but yeah, apologies again. Our agenda is essentially these welcome slides, which I think we've covered. We're going to have 2 talks, and then we have any other business discussion at the end, which is a list conversation that was kicked off in the last week or so, related to the landscape and internet governance. We don't have a speaker for that, but if folks want to talk about that, you are invited to do so. I will be sort of moderating between the 2 talk transitions and the later discussion. And anything else, please ping me on Meet Echo. Apologies that I couldn't be there with you today. So I will do just like a really brief intro to HRPC and then hand it over to our first speaker. So yes, this is the Human Rights and Protocol Considerations Research Group. We are looking at the relationship between protocols and human rights. We have typically focused on the 2 rights, freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. We also have plenty of discussion around the right to privacy, but there is another research group dedicated to privacy. So there is only a slight bit of overlap when we can help that. We've in the past proposed guidelines. This is RFC 8280 that discuss how to consider human rights in standards. Some folks have even used a human rights considerations section of drafts. That's not that common, certainly not required. And it helps to raise awareness, I think, in the documents. We also then work out in the human rights community. So a lot of us are very active in social movements, in nonprofit organizations, and policy advocacy spaces. The list goes on, working on human rights. And so we talk about the IETF and the importance of protocols on those things. And it's sort of a, two-pronged strategy, if you will. Things that we've done to date, actually, we don't need to update on that slide. So I guess I will just say, I think 2025, I'll go back and look for sure, but I think it's 10 years since HRPC was chartered. That anniversary might actually be coming up in November, but just to say, I think we've had a lot of really great talks. We've done, I think, some work that folks should be really proud of. And it's always great. It's always great to see interest in this group continue, and apologies, we can't be there in person. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, who I believe I said on the agenda is Anita. Is that right?
It's Max, so.
Okay, cool. Sorry, thanks for correcting me. So Max, when you take over slides, so there's a button at the bottom that says share slides. I think I have to approve you to do that, but if you ask, I should be able to let you.
Yes, slide preview.
So if you then pick the slides, you should see yours in the list.
Indeed.
Perfect.
That
Well done.
seems to be working.
Yeah, so go right ahead. I'm going to throw a timer up on your screen and take it away.
Yes, this is working. So welcome everybody. This talk is on what is in India called indigenous 5G networks, the next generation telecommunications networks, and my own interpretation of where indigenous 5G networks could go, is that they could take on developing along a non-aligned technological trajectory. And of course, I will explain all those in more detail during the talk. I'm giving this talk because I spent 3 months in India investigating indigenous 5G networks. So first I will contextualize the fieldwork in the larger research project, and then I will report on some preliminary results, foregrounding the risks and the possibilities in indigenous 5G networks for human rights considerations, and I will explain the possibilities for policy interventions that I saw on the field. So my name is Maxigaz. I only use this one name to publish, and I'm mostly interested in how infrastructural ideologies turn into digital materialities. In more simple words, how politics works through media infrastructures. I am assistant professor in Utrecht University, and I am leading the standards track of the Critical Infrastructure Lab. The lab is a small group of a few researchers with an office at the University of Amsterdam, and now extended organizationally to Utrecht University. We do different interventions, and for instance, Valerie also participated in one of our retreats in Montenegro. So we try to think together, not just with the academics, but also policymakers, even industry representatives, and mostly civil society. We also publish plenty of reports. These are the reports from the last 2 years, and I am writing up a report on the fieldwork right now, so that will be the publication in which you can read more about what I'm saying today. So, indigenous 5G in India. The larger theoretical framework around how I look at this topic is that I'm trying to understand how the technological substance of 5G networks is made, but I'm trying to do that because I think that media shapes space and time, and through this shaping of space and time, it also creates not just objects, but also subjects. So I'm trying to see what kind of political subjects can be created by different kind of networks. And the concept of technological sovereignty is, of course, how these questions have been sounded by politicians and technologists in the last few years. I identify 3 trends of why this sudden recent interest in technological sovereignty. So the capability of mostly countries, but also other actors, to take decisions about their own technology use. These 3 trends are digitalization, decarbonization, and deglobalization. And maybe it is the third one that warrants more explanation. So with, for instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that supply chains became very brittle, and also the industrialization that happened in the middle of the last century didn't have good consequences. The supply chains became very distributed and hard to keep up. And increased geopolitical tensions meant that countries tried to see if they can sustain their own everyday life using technologies that they manufacture themselves. So this is how this is the context in which indigenous 5G networks emerged in India. So why to look at 5G networks? I claim that 5G networks became a kind of geopolitical fetish. And by that, I mean that great powers agreed that they will compete based on who has the greatest 5G deployment and who has companies that have a market share in different 5G markets as telecommunications companies, but also mainly as vendors of equipment and solutions to the telecommunications companies. We can also observe in 5G networks a convergence of internet logic, internet networks and the telecommunications networks, which were quite separate in the beginning, and now they are coming together into what I call programmable infrastructures. Programmable infrastructures mean that the end-to-end principle that guided the design of the internet is questioned, and I would argue that it is subverted in 5G networks. Usually these tendencies are discussed under monikers such as network function virtualization or software-defined networks. So we see that the new generation telecommunications networks offer a lot of flexibility, and arguably the new protocols also reconfigure the power relationships in a more political sense. My own project is based on the idea that I'm sorry to tell the Internet Engineering Task Force crowd that it is not just standards that count when it comes to political outcomes on the ground, but also how these standards are turned into products through implementation, and also how such products are assembled into a working infrastructure that is deployed to serve end users. So in my project, I try to take into account the power relationships and how protocols reconfigure political possibilities on these three levels of standardization, implementation, and deployment. So I will not say a lot about the Indian context right now for lack of time, but just to mention that it is the second largest telecommunications market at the moment. And what I saw that historically there is a small number of merchant industrialist families who are still major players in the Indian economy, and who have also played their own role in the history of the country, not just in this decade of 5G networks, but also much earlier, even before the independence of India. And another notable factor to mention is the Make in India campaign of the government, which provides tax subsidies, tax breaks, and other subsidies to companies that manufacture locally. In more general terms, with Modi's government, we see an ethno-nationalist ideology that is served as a justification for the state to shape markets and supply chains. And the creation of indigenous 5G is very much an exercise in how states can shape markets through manipulating the conditions of the supply chain. So I employed a variety of different methods during my fieldwork, but all in all, what I can say is that I try to position myself within the number of actors who were inhabiting this space of indigenous 5G. And that was quite large number of actors. I call them stakeholders in this slide. And I was approaching all these stakeholders, asking them how 5G can better serve the public interest. So I conducted the fieldwork in Delhi and Bengaluru, but the more intense, concentrated part of the infrastructure works where I tried to map the technological substance of indigenous 5G was in the place that you see in the picture. It is called Nehru Place, and at least guidebooks and YouTube videos claim that it's one of the biggest electronics markets in India. And indeed, I did find indigenous 5G networks in production in Nehru Place. I also talked to, as I said, a wide range of stakeholders. And for instance, I talked to people who install these 5G networks on rooftops. This happened last year in September. So I found that quite important because the news articles and the industry press that I was also following is somewhat unreliable, and it is common that claims are made that are not actually substantiated when you look at the facts on the ground. So I was also using different maps to confirm my observations from walking around. At the end of the fieldwork, I attended the Indian Mobile Congress, and there I could see all the different stakeholders that I mapped in the previous part of the fieldwork assembled in one space, and it was an opportunity to talk to many of them in person. I included this slide in the presentation because it shows that Narendra Modi was a ubiquitous presence in this trade fair. So it was quite clear that there is a strong mandate for Indian industry from the government to develop indigenous 5G networks. One of the players in this local 5G equipment vendor market is Tejas Network, and these are some of the antennas that they exhibited at the trade fair. So my overall assessment of the state of indigenous 5G networks on a non-aligned technological trajectory is that indeed there is a strong and effective industrial policy that is driving indigenous 5G networks to become a reality. And the ecosystem of vendors, developers, workers, and expertise exists for making indigenous 5G networks. They are even deployed in production, serving end users in experimental settings, but there is no mass deployment of them at the moment. However, as I will also mention a bit later, the government-owned telecommunications company BSNL has a mandate and has the money to actually deploy these networks on a large scale in the country. So because of this situation that these networks will be widely deployed in the next few years, I think that there is a strategic window of opportunity for intervention to make sure that these networks serve the public interest. Why I am calling this non-aligned technological trajectory? This is a bit of an ambitious claim where I make a parallel between a movement, a coalition of countries during the Cold War, where which was also largely animated by figures like Fidel Castro, for instance. And I think that there is a parallel because the idea of indigenous 5G is that India should be able to make and put in place its own 5G solution, steering clear of the geopolitical tensions and also the dependencies, the technological dependencies between the great powers. And when it comes to 5G, the great powers are on one hand US and Europe. So on the right side, you see an Ericsson antenna looking to the west, and on the east, China, whose Huawei is actually making, I would say, the best and the cheapest 5G networks at the moment. So what you see in the middle are antennas manufactured by Tejas Networks that I already showed, and ingrained with the logo of the BSNL state-owned telecommunications company that is the fourth largest player on the Indian telecommunications market. So here in this picture, I tried to show this idea that there could be a 5G solution, not just for India, but for other countries that can stay clear the hegemony of the current major vendors such as Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, and the few other companies. So on the right, you see a list of stakeholders that are engaging in the creation of indigenous 5G networks, and these were the stakeholders that I approached and engaged with. I see possibilities in 5G networks exactly because they are programmable infrastructures. And the programmability means, for instance, that infrastructure sharing could happen on a much deeper level than before. For instance, one of the interesting options is for community networks to manage their own slices on the network, which means that they could control how the network is operated without having to deploy a countrywide physical infrastructure. That would mean that it would be easier to align implementation and deployment of 5G networks with public values. The risks and limitations that I saw is that the indigenous 5G networks are only indigenous in terms of the implementation and deployment, while even the actors that I'm talking to, the stakeholders around indigenous 5G, often overlook the fact that while Huawei is effectively banned from the national market, in fact, what they are doing is they are implementing 5G standards in whose drafting Chinese actors and especially Huawei engineers had a really strong role. Also, I think the biggest risk is that once 5G networks are deployed, especially by the government-owned telecommunications company, network slices could not just serve community networks, but they could also be used for more precise information control by the government. And in general, my experience discussing with the stakeholders was that there is a limited interest in public benefits from vendors and policymakers, which means that the actors insist that what they build as indigenous 5G networks is a valid, a correct implementation of 5G standards, but they fail to account for the idiosyncrasy, for the special properties of this network. And this is where I think that rhetorically the ideas for making 5G networks serve the public interest fits in, because eventually these vendors and policymakers have to argue why their networks are better than networks from Huawei and Ericsson. I mapped two scenarios. a positive, hopeful one, and one that is a worst case scenario. So I will start with the worst case scenario, and that will more or less, these two scenarios will more or less close the reporting on the results of the fieldwork. So there is a scenario where 5G networks could transform how internet shutdowns are conducted in India. And that is, of course, a very important factor, because India has been leading in the frequency of internet shutdowns. There have been more internet shutdowns in the last years in India than in any other countries. So what happens is that when there is social unrest, the government turns off internet connectivity, but also the mobile phone networks, in order to prevent information from circulating amongst the population. Of course, there is an ethno-nationalist agenda, as I mentioned before, which justifies such repression. And using this agenda, the government can acquire the powers to actually conduct the internet shutdowns. In this context, 5G enables a tighter government control over the network. In more concrete terms, it is once BSNL, the government-owned telecommunications company, deployed a 5G network in the country, it is possible to have slices dedicated for different purposes, for different use cases of the telecommunications network. And once that happened, it could be a possibility that there is a slice for government operations, there is a slice for e-commerce, and these two slices continue to operate while all other telecommunication services are shut down. That would mean that it wouldn't be a complete internet shutdown, but only e-commerce and government services would continue to work, while end users could not communicate with each other, and private messages could not spread on the network. Another concern is that 5G networks and concretely 5G antennas use techniques such as beamforming, and when beamforming is in place in the network, the antennas have a very precise idea in the last 5G standards, an idea based on centimeters of the end user equipment position in geographic space. While this is a concern, most technologists at the moment say that this information would stay on the bottom of the technological stack, so only the antennas would know about these positions, and the information about the positions of end users would not be exposed to the rest of the network. However, for instance, with the leadership of Ericsson, there is a worldwide coalition to work on application programming interfaces, APIs, that could expose network functions and information from lower stacks of the networks on the application layer. So there is also a possibility that the antennas could report on the position of end users in real time. And of course, for purposes of controlling social unrest, this is a grave concern. Finally, in the nightmare version of the worst case scenario, it is also possible to use antennas as a kind of radar system, which would mean that the telecommunications company would transition from being a communications provider during the internet shutdown to being a sensor provider that can transmit information on how people and objects are situated in a dense urban environment in real time to the repressive state apparatus. So radio waves could be used as a kind of radar, replacing the function of security cameras. In a positive scenario, we can see how community networks can play a role in 5G networks, and a lot of my fieldwork was indeed oriented towards mapping the barriers of entry for community networks into the 5G space. This idea has some precedents. So there has been a very interesting and very prolific and quite influential movement for appropriate technologies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in India that looked at how instead of technology transfer from foreign countries, technology could be developed locally that serves local needs and local contexts. Even at the moment, India has a thriving community networks scene, and there are meetings, there are existing networks that can be built on. So in this scenario, the programmable infrastructure of 5G would enable more civil society control over the network. What could this mean in more concrete terms? Well, for instance, there are projects for developing carrier-grade free and open source software for running more open radio access networks. The iOS MCN project is a prime example of that in the Indian context. And elsewhere, there are experiments for running 5G networks in a way that takes human rights considerations into account. And one of the most interesting experiments have been conducted by the Invisive company. And the project was called Pretty Good Phone Privacy, where they used the electronic SIM cards that are part of the 5G infrastructure to rotate the identity of users on a regular basis, making, of course, user tracking much harder and providing privacy services and guarantees to their users. This service have been deployed in production and have been working for a few months. And due to regulatory concerns, it was recently shut down. In fact, in lab settings, in laboratory settings, and in 5G development centers, there have been scientific academic research on how to implement VPN-like functionality or even mixed networks using the programmable infrastructures of 5G networks. So the idea here would be that there are already existing privacy-enhancing technologies, such as, for instance, the Tor network. But while the Tor network mainly aims to hide the IP address of the user and to cloak the identity of the user on the level of the HTTP and TCP/IP protocols, there is no protection from on the side of the Tor network that is provided to users who are using a mobile phone network. And of course, mobile phone networks transmit the identities of their users to the telecommunications companies. So a similar solution to the Tor network could be implemented that works on the level of telecommunication stacks. So that's the end of my presentation. In conclusion, indigenous 5G networks offer the possibility of developing 5G on a non-aligned technological trajectory, which means that there would be a possibility for countries to steer clear of the power blocks of the West, or the power blocks of well, to escape the geopolitical rivalry between United States, Europe, and China. That's what I would say. And on the last slide, I put a summary of the research design for this project. Thank you very much.
Maxi, thanks so much for that presentation. I'm going to ask, I see a queue building up, but I think, knowing what also Anita is going to talk about, that we should actually hold all discussion for the last 30 minutes of the session. Maxi, if that's okay with you to hold on into the end. I think we'll have a richer discussion, and I think we can have then more time for questions. So thanks to Olaf, and there was somebody else who's in the queue for stepping out, but please do come back later on. So Maxi, if you could, actually I can do this for you, ta-da. Anita, if you request to share slides, I'm approving that now, and then you should be able to choose them. Okay, I think we're all set. Great. Please welcome. Really happy to have you. I'm going to set a similar timer for 30 minutes, and then for the last 30 minutes of the session, we will do Q&A on both your talks. Thanks so much, Anita. Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a complete pleasure and honor to be here with all of you. And in some sense, also to celebrate this moment as an important coming together of concerns about society and the possibilities of technology. And I think for a very, very long time, this has pretty much been part of lip service. And I think we are thankfully in times where we are able to ask what will help us walk the talk. So what I'm going to do is you're going to get more of an afternoon dose of India. But that's, I think, following up on what Max's presentation was. This will be building on that, but is slightly focused on the domain of public health. So it's a little bit of a drill down into the domain of public health. So I hope that this will be relevant and interesting. I assume I have to use the slides clicker. Okay, yeah, I can see this is fine. Thanks so much, Mallory. So what I'm going to share with you is broadly a case study, which is somewhat bookended on both sides by a little bit of introduction into the Indian government's approach to public infrastructures in the digital domain. Also looking at what has been the broad political ideological stance. I will then go into a deep dive of the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, ABDM, quite a mouthful, but is the centerpiece of what we will analyze today. And really ask the question, is India's healthcare approach, including its technological approaches in healthcare, good enough with respect to ethical safeguards? I just have a very short concluding slide, which raises questions and open reflections on what's really happening empirically. So this is, of course, a terminology that in a very relatively short period of time has garnered a lot of, I think, public imagination, the whole idea of digital public infrastructure. But I guess I see this, kind of claim to fame of this terminology as a good development. That's because infrastructures are always contested. And it's a good thing that we are actually able to discuss digital public infrastructures and ask what's public about them, right? And what is the meaning of public coming from different interdisciplinary domains, from political science, from computational sciences, and the rest. Obviously, it's a large umbrella term that's used for technological systems, mostly comprising an ecosystem kind of framework, This could include digital ID, data sharing systems, digital payments, and much more. And in fact, one of the organizations located in Bangalore, which is my city, refers to this as essential capabilities for people's participation in society and in markets. And I think we would all agree that that's true. The term, of course, has been used in a variety of contexts, including what Max presented, to larger top-down services, including welfare payments. And in terms of what it could include as an ecosystem, we are looking at a range of things: technological standards, governance measures, as well as a community, what Max referred to as stakeholders. So there's a large bunch of people, sometimes, not always, with the same interests. So that's what makes it interesting. So India's approach to DPI, I think in terms of facts, in terms of just, what's out there, we have too many things. And, we oftentimes, the state's rhetoric is about how we got there first, and we had many things to show the world. Of course, increasing amounts of research and very, very solid research undertaken raise questions about how all of this can be done better. And that is the process, I think, of asserting democracy and democratic voice over technological infrastructures. So as the slide points, we have Aadhaar, the digital ID systems, the unified payments interface, which is a big hit with many other governments in Southeast Asia and in Africa. The Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, which was ushered in order to give a more level playing field for smaller actors in e-commerce, and such other. So these are parts of what could be the kind of suite of products that, or public goods, that become infrastructure. So to ABDM, which is a healthcare DPI in India. This was launched not so far back, but immediately following the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the objective of developing the backbone that was necessary to support integrated digital health infrastructure in the country. Telemedicine was becoming popular, remote diagnostics, etc. And to bridge the existing gap among different stakeholders of the healthcare ecosystem, it was seen that digital highways would be necessary. Like most digital policy documents, there is a certain, unequivocal, celebratory tone about all these infrastructures. And the idea is to make them seamless, make the health domain and health public services seamless, and of course, bring in innovation. So the other thing about the ideological apparatus around the world is that regardless of whether you're a developing country or a developed country, the discourse of innovation often is infused in imaginaries of infrastructural policy in the digital area. So this frictionless exchange of health data makes many assumptions, which we will unpack in the subsequent slides. The idea being that India's public health challenges, we are close to 1.5 billion. And you can imagine that as a country that's really, really struggling with many indicators, including maternal mortality, which is one of, which is pretty much, I think, an area of deep concern, and, child nutrition and many other large endemic problems in public health. The idea of a frictionless exchange of health data to bring in innovation to address public health challenges almost seems like if we could wave the magic wand, then we would actually all be very helpful. But let's just examine how that has panned out. I just wanted to say that the ABDM, which is the larger digital institutional infrastructure for health, has many components. It has the digital health ID. This is over and above the Aadhaar ID, right? This is over and above the foundational digital ID for those who are Indians. The digital health ID is Unfortunately, in design terms, it is ceded to the Aadhaar ID. So these two IDs are linked. The Health Facility Registry, the Health Professionals Registry, which means whether you're a clinician working in the local neighborhood, or you're a doctor in a public hospital or a private health facility, you would be part of the Professionals Registry. The Unified Health Interface, which is again a framework of open protocols, and the Digital Health Application for smartphones. So this is just to give you an idea of the architecture. And this is how the data flows on the APDM, right? So the data principal holds the unique health ID, and there's a consent manager. The patient is supposedly providing consent to sharing their health data to the information, the health providers, as well as to health registries. And the health registries, of course, carve out who the actors are within this larger health ecosystem. So this is how the entire idea is designed. And again, in somewhat of techno-deterministic terms, this system architecture is seen to be like an hourglass. So you need innovation, you need a one-size-fits-all solution so that things are standardized, and you need physical devices to support the innovation. So the idea, therefore, is to take this as the base and foundation of the policy and the way in which it will be rolled out. So let's look at the way in which the ethical baselines and operationalization actually pans out. I'm going to use a bioethics framework as the lens through which we shall examine how the ABDM works. I'm going to use the acronym ABDM because that's easier to understand. This is, of course, the Digital Health Mission, as I already explained. Within the traditional bioethics framework, which has really been used for several decades now in health research, there are 4 critical dimensions. The first is non-malfeasance, which is do no harm, as we understand. The second is beneficence, which is the duty to promote good, right? Public good. The third is autonomy, which is obviously decisional rights, the ability to make independent choices. And the fourth is distributive justice, which is overall there has to be an equity within in the way in which health services are accessed. So now taking this as the baseline to understand how we might design for public health, how we might design our techno-architectures for public health. The UNDP has certain basic principles. It has certain foundational principles, which it adapts from the bioethics arena, and it has certain operational principles, which are directly principles that underpin the way in which code is written, for instance, which would be in terms of, and of course, and how data and data is managed at the level of the aggregate data sets. So you can see very, very important and foundational aspects of data protection, data security, data privacy, etc. So we will look at all the 4 bioethics principles here. So the first one is the principle of do no harm. So the data system of the ABDM actually, unfortunately, lacks an effective rule of law framework. In India, we don't have a health data policy that's grounded in data protection yet. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act is going to come into force, and the rules of the data protection law are being discussed now. And once that's in force, it remains to be seen how the health data management policy will be refined. But what's really, really worrisome, even in the act that is just going to become, come into force, is that we don't have adequate safeguards for the use and reuse of anonymized data. So when you look at a large anonymized data sets from the health domain through disease surveillance, for instance, downstream users are not governed in a manner in which rights may be enabled. So this is a very important loophole. And I would say that when you operationalize non-malfeasance, you have to really look at do not harm, do not discriminate, do not exclude as vital pillars. How do we fare on the ABDM? We don't fare well at all. Privacy by design translates into data blind consent managers and data exchange. in the tech lingo, oftentimes we think that tech data blindness, that passes through consent managers is good enough. Or we assume that data security that translates into encryption in data exchange is good enough. But ideas of privacy and security, as Max pointed out, arise in contexts that are very, very real. And when dystopia arises, then we have reason to worry. So the questions to be asked here are, what about the risks of predatory downstream data practices that lead to de-anonymization or group profiling? Enough is understood and known today through the data and AI governance debates about a simple zip code allowing us to generalize, certain things about populations. Similarly, who's responsible for a data breach? So the operationalization of non-malfeasance leaves a lot to be desired. The next principle here is beneficence, which is the duty to promote well-being, the duty to promote public good, right? So the ABDM, of course, expands health data collection. The entire idea was, here is a market, it's a post-COVID context, everybody's going online. So can we do something to enable the cross-pollination of medical data generated in clinical settings and non-medical data through the foundational citizen ID, which is Aadhaar? So this has led to a kind of a point of no return of unrelenting commoditization of healthcare. And the insurance-led model in the country, which has come into being, really is unfortunately leading us to a diagnostic-heavy methodology. So the acumen of the health provider in diagnosing very, very simple local illnesses, seasonal illnesses, diseases that are endemic to a region, that has been replaced by a very heavy-duty, something that displaces the provider in terms of the course of treatment that is provided in clinical settings. And this almost exclusively benefits the insurance providers and increases the cost of care. And we actually see very dubious kinds of collusion between small hospitals and insurance providers who really pull the wool over the eyes of unsuspecting patients, telling them, they have to get admitted, they have to invoke their insurance. So this is a kind of perverse confluence of interests that has happened as a result of the impetus given to commoditization of data. So obviously, I think where there should be an effective remedy and redress, we actually see the larger public health policy shift its compass from strengthening public health infrastructure, quite like the NHS in the UK, to centering data markets. So you think that innovation means deepening data markets. Just as a fun fact, I have put there some statistics. I already mentioned we are 1.46 billion. The Indian hospital industry alone accounts for 80% of the total healthcare system and was valued at 132 billion a couple of years ago. And we spend abysmally on our public healthcare outlays. Our budgets are just about 2% of the GDP. So in terms of operational design principles, the openness and interoperability of data seem to be inherently beneficial is really not working out, because when you combine clinical and non-clinical data, one might compromise beneficence because you're opening up this data to market interests. You're giving market interests a kind of a push, an impulse. This also brings questions to the fore of how data protection frameworks need to move beyond categories of sensitive personal data. Because just calling something sensitive personal data is not enough, because data could actually become sensitive potentially in the interlinking, right? So something that is not sensitive could become sensitive because you're allowing these interlinkages in the design architecture. Now let's look at the third principle, which is really about autonomy and the ability to make choices. Of course, patients must register with the ABDM data architecture in order to avail of healthcare services. This is a little bit worrisome because for many of us who can access private healthcare, we could always, shop, right? We could doctor shop, we could shop between hospitals. But for those who are dependent on public healthcare, the fact that you have to pay a data fee in order to avail of a healthcare facility is really interfering with their right to access healthcare. So in some sense, the design of the institutional architecture of this kind of technology predicated on data and interoperability of data and interlinking of data is leading to a certain undermining of individual and collective autonomy. Why collective autonomy? Because there are many, many people, who may, for instance, patients of HIV, who may find it extremely stigmatizing to identify themselves. So a group of people with a certain disease profile might actually be left out. So looking at this, I skipped this slide, but I also wanted to point out that there are other problems with the choices, right? Doctors who otherwise would look at a patient and examine them with just very, very elementary kinds of equipment are now using drop-down options. And these drop-down options oftentimes do not have certain categories that locally doctors may want to use. What does this mean? This actually means that decision-making about treatment and treatment options is taken away from the healthcare provider. So we are talking about the autonomy of the patient, and we are talking about the autonomy of the healthcare provider. And in terms of the mandatory linking of Aadhaar, I already called it a data fee that patients have to pay. We see an undercutting of autonomy at both individual and collective levels. This violates the privacy by design principle, and the inbuilt choices in diagnosis in terms of the UI interfaces really prevent patient centricity, and it privileges standardized data sets. So you need everything standardized for the sake of the data markets. The final principle is distributive justice. I think it's important to understand that we are a country where basic healthcare facilities and an increase in quality of healthcare delivery can really, really go a very long way in improving the quality of life of people. But unfortunately, what really happens is that we seem to be privileging insurance companies. And I already mentioned the kind of perverse confluence of interest that arise in the context of provisioning insurance money as an incentive for hospitals to be built in small towns. So the government's assurance that we are going to cover for insurance is not necessarily leading to a distribution of the actual physical infrastructure of healthcare. What it's leading to is it's still pushing patients to urban towns where they pay huge amounts of money and use their insurance without a guarantee of healthcare. And statistics reveal that a large proportion of the insurance scheme money of the government of India is actually going to private healthcare providers. So that's the irony of all of this. So does distributive justice get operationalized? Unfortunately, interoperability and openness tend to get misused for predatory markets because all the information about the patient is available with the insurance care providers, and one would suspect that knowing more than you need to will also allow you to pitch commissions at a level that is unlawful, right? So you're able to manipulate commissions, and you're able to do this. And that's outside of the scheme, insurance scheme that's provided to those who are below the poverty line. So these are concluding thoughts. I wouldn't, of course, want to talk to an extremely erudite group like this about how architecture is policy, right? But the idea, even in spatial terms, even in geospatial terms, means that architectural design and planning really affect the quality of your life. It affects the built environment. It affects and influences public life. So the ecosystem of ABDM and the way in which these protocols have been designed to be rolled out in the real world, this is really influencing the way in which health is experienced, the way in which healthcare is provisioned. So we're actually talking about the materialities that Max actually pointed to in his first slide. So We could, of course, design these differently to uphold rights, uphold ethics. We can create a society that can make public services access a universal right. The question or the problem statement posed to the technologists and the politicians could be, how can the use of technological infrastructure provide healthcare to all as a universal right? Or you could define the problem statement in terms of how you can actually promote innovation, which is not really thoughtful. Of course, one is not assuming that all innovation is not thoughtful, but one is saying that this kind of glib reference to innovation is usually not necessarily the kind of deep innovation, the deep investments, the deep stakes that arise in taking care of societal problems. We also noticed that the privatization of healthcare access has been enhanced, unfortunately, owing to the combination of the data systems as well as the rise of the insurance provider and the government provision of insurance schemes to the poor. This kind of triangulation has led to possibilities of marketization of health. Assumptions about tech and innovation are at the heart of social adoption of technology, and the case study points to how public health values, goals, and outcomes are indeed being shaped. I would therefore like to submit, and in all humility, I know that this is a conversation we have to have with all of you, and possibly you all have other case studies here. Openness, interoperability, and that word called scalability, it's quite confounding. Does everything have to be scalable? At the level of the government, of course, the government is looking at a low-cost solution. But since technology is like a double-edged sword, I think we really need to think a lot more. And finally, rule of law cannot be substituted by tech protocolization, right? So institutional safeguards are as important as design safeguards. I'll stop there, and I'm very, very happy to answer questions and take other insights. Over to you, Mallory.
Anita, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this presentation. And also, Maxigas, if you want to also come back, because we should be building, folks should be getting in the queue now. If you are interested in asking questions to either. So I see a couple folks have re-entered. Olaf, good, you're back. Yeah, now's the time. And like I mentioned before, you can also type a question into the chat and just type Mike if you want somebody to read out loud, namely me. So Jonathan, you're first in the queue.
Hi. I thought it was, thank you for a talk. It was very, very interesting. I was a bit confused about one of your operational principles. So one of them is leverage market dynamics. And then on subsequent slides, you're like, oh yes, people want to use this to make money. But that's literally one of the operational principles you chose. And so that was obviously the outcome, no?
I think this was to Anita, right?
Yes,
Jonathan?
thanks. Absolutely. And in fact, there are two responses to this. I think leveraging market mechanisms and leveraging the market is often seen as an inherent part of the policy dynamic with respect to all of our digital public goods in India. And I think that it has to be nuanced. Also, the slide that you noticed is from the UNDP. And I also think that the global governance discourse on this tries to promote things which are without thinking them through. So leveraging market dynamics towards the large good would be, I think, a better principle than leveraging market dynamics. Because towards what is a very important thing. I was trying to point out that these discourses are never questioned. And many of these countries also export their digital public goods, which means you're transplanting the ideology from one country to another. Thank you for the observation.
Thank you.
Great. John, you're next.
John Matson, Ericsson, some comments on Maxigas. You said that Indian implementation of Chinese-dominated 5G standards. I heard that before, and I would say I don't think that's a correct description at all. There's a huge amount of companies in 3GPP. I don't think anybody working in 3GPP would say it's Chinese dominated. You have other vendors like Ericsson, Nokia. You have a lot of mobile phone chipset like Qualcomm, Apple, Samsung, a lot of global operators and SIM card manufacturers. And in fact, in 3GPP, it's very easy to block something. It's easier to object something than in IETF. So I just don't think the standard is Chinese dominated. Whether you think that is good or bad, I don't think it's true. Yeah. Then you said that 5G, a lot of things that 5G enables shutdown on control. I'm a bit skeptical. When it comes to complete shutdown, I don't think 5G changes very much. If you have a centralized network, you can shut it down. And as long as you have a centralized network with identities and you know who these identities belong to, you can shut down these users. I don't think slicing make much of a difference. It's a technology to build a virtual network, technology that has been standard in like fixed internet for ages. Beamforming exists in Wi-Fi also. And here, definitely modern wireless networks know more exactly where the user are, but they do that to be able to increase the efficiency. Spectrum is a very limited resource. So if you want broadband for everybody everywhere, you need to do it efficiently. Like building optical fibers is not cost efficient in large parts of the world. So there's a trade-off there. But you need to be aware what whoever has the information is doing with it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Maxi, if you want to respond. I also have maybe a point to make if you don't. I can't hear you for some reason. Are you unmuted? Oh yeah, just unmute. Oh, can you not unmute yourself? Oh, sorry, that's my bad. Go ahead. You should be fine now.
You have to click the microphone button, Maxigas.
I have a couple of times. If somebody else can.
Maxigas has to.
Oh. He requests it, and then I have to approve it. It's because I kicked him off.
He doesn't
earlier.
have to request it. I'm clicking it without any request.
Daniel, it's because I kicked him off earlier because of Anita's presentation, and so he's in a holding pin. Thank you, Francesca.
I got out of the loop. Great, thank you. So thank you very much for all these valuable comments, and of course it's the great thing about this space that we have very knowledgeable people to comment on these topics. So about the let's start with the beamforming, or let's go 1, 2, 3. So about whether 5G is standard making is dominated by Huawei or Chinese actors. I think the point from the starting from the question of indigenous 5G is that India for sure is not a major player in 5G standardization. And one of the motivations for India to develop indigenous 5G networks is to decrease its technological dependency from the great power blocks. And indeed, China is the main actor on whose it's yeah, that India wants to depend on less. So that's the point, and I totally take that notion that there are many actors working in the 3GPP, and it is hard for one single actor to push through a proposal without support from the others. About slicing, I also agree that it's a technology for virtual networks, and that's something that has existed in previous generations of networking technologies. But I do think, and well, talking with the stakeholders on the ground, it does seem like slicing would be making it more convenient for the government to conduct internet shutdowns, exactly because they could make it partial, using the greater control over the network that slicing gives. And about beamforming, indeed. So beamforming is very good for a number of reasons. It increases efficiency and it saves spectrum, as you said. But I also think that in terms of the architecture, there has to be more safeguards, but maybe even in terms of the policies that govern the deployment of 5G networks, there has to be more safeguards for making sure that this positioning information that is necessary for operating beamforming stays with the antenna site, and it is not circulated in the network, and especially that it is not exposed to third parties. And I do see a development of even not just in 5G technologies, but also in the 5G market, that exposing lower level information is considered a monetization vector in business models. So there is a drift where this could become a reality, and I think we should stop it at that point. Beamforming is good, but it should stay with the antenna.
Agree. Companies selling or misusing geolocation information is definitely problematic. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we'll move on really quickly. I just wanted to make the point from an advocacy perspective on internet shutdowns. One of the most effective and persuasive arguments has been that of the collateral cost to them in monetary terms. I think NetBlocks, maybe even ISOC to some degree. I don't remember exactly, but actually putting figures down for different countries of the cost of an internet shutdown is very effective. But if you slice it and you diminish that sort of collateral damage, that advocacy point becomes less effective. Anyway, Olaf, you're here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. If I cough so now and then, it's the airco that did it. I work for the Internet Society, but I'm speaking strictly on personal title. But since you mentioned the Internet Society, what you just referred to is the shutdown calculator, which you can find via post.internetsociety.org. First, I want to thank Anita for the very inspiring talk. I really liked it, but I don't have a question about it. I have a question for Max, or more or less three questions, which I think are covered already a little bit in the answer to John. You were talking about indigenous technology. You know, when I think about indigenous technologies, I think of the work that we, for instance, my day job does in form of building community networks for indigenous communities, which is relatively small scale. When I heard you talk about this, I heard something like an industry policy of a country that is close to 1.5 billion people and that wants its own supply chain. So for me, that there's a confusing mismatch in the use of the word indigenous, and that is something that I want to share. And maybe you have a comment on that, but in the meantime, I need to unlock this again. You also described the second point. I have three. You also described the pros and cons, the possibilities and the threats of using 5G technology, the slices, but also the blocking. I agree with that analysis, specifically creating slices for ongoing business, so to speak. But they are part of the architecture, I understand. The 5G architecture enables all this. So that already is all set in the system design developed by 3GPP and implemented, and is enabled by operators. So it doesn't matter whether you have Indian, American, European, Chinese, or South African equipment, you can build this stuff for good or for bad. Or at least that's my understanding of 5G, and I'm not a specialist. So I'd like you to comment on that. And then on the use of slices, the same applies. The slices are just a technology that is, baked into the architecture, and whether you use that or not doesn't really depend on the equipment and the sovereignty of the equipment that you use, but on the offerings of the operator, and frankly, the economics of being able to use that. And specifically for the more positive use cases, I wonder if you have some comments about those economics.
Thanks, Olaf. And just to interject, we have only like 9 minutes left, so
will these communities pay through the nose? That's sort of the underlying question.
Well put.
I tried to be very short because I'd like more discussion to happen. Indeed, calling these networks indigenous 5G networks is confusing, and in some sense we can say that the Indian policymakers are using indigenous people as a kind of cannon fodder for marketing purposes of promoting Indian-made 5G networks. So I do think that this is a problematic terminology, and I'd like to emphasize what I started the presentation with, that indigenous 5G network is how this technology stack is called in the Indian context, and the non-aligned technological trajectory is my interpretation of what is happening. About slicing and information control, indeed, all these possibilities, even the worst case scenarios can be implemented with 5G networks from any other vendor, be that Huawei networks or Ericsson networks. Why I think that this is especially interesting in the context of 5G networks in India, because the fourth biggest player on the market is owned by the government, and other telecommunications companies on the market are under tighter government control than in many other countries. But building Indian-made 5G network operated by the government-owned telecommunications company, I believe makes it a bigger risk that these features, such as slicing, that are indeed part of the 5G architecture, will be used against the local population. And this is not just speculation, but as I said, internet shutdowns are happening regularly in India. So it would be just using the technology that is there to enhance the methodology of the shutdowns. And about community economics, I tried to emphasize the idea of infrastructure sharing, which would exactly mean that community networks would not have to deploy their own physical infrastructure in a coverage area, but in the same way that, for instance, in spectrum allocation for FM radio, there is in many countries a band for community usage. There could be not just a special spectrum in 5G networks for community networks, but there could be also special slices. That's all. Thank you. And very inspiring comments.
Thanks. Dhruv, so happy to welcome you to the mic. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mallory. I'm based in India. I'm based in Bangalore, working for a Chinese vendor, so weird hats. But very good talks. I really liked it. I think I want to build on what Olaf said on point number 2. And I think that's the part Maxigas is not very clear. Like, why are we saying that just because the implementations are done in India, the standards are going to behave differently? Like 3GPP standards are the same, the 5G same, network slicing remain the same. It's up to the operators whether they're going to use this feature. Just because the implementations happen in a particular country, that part is not as clear to me, but if you can add something there, that would be really nice. And other point that I wanted to maybe make for both the speakers is like, what's your takeaway for the IRTF, IETF, HRPC from these talks? If you can distill that out a little bit, that would be very useful. Thank you.
All right, I don't want to take the whole discussion, so very shortly. Indeed, I think that in this particular space, maybe that's not so obvious how, apart from standardization, there are many serious decisions taken on the level of implementation and deployment, but in particular with the what is called indigenous 5G in India, the idea of implementing indigenous 5G is that of course, not all, there is no operator that implements all the 5G standards. So which 5G standards gets implemented actually determine the eventual capabilities of the network. But my argument about this is not solely based on the technical considerations, but also on the historical, cultural, and social environment in which the development of this technology and the use of this technology is happening.
Thanks. My answer is somewhat short, and but I think that it is something all of us understand and appreciate. Because there are use cases for technology, I think grasp of of that is most important. And instead of doing this kind of you develop something, you feel very proud about it because the product has taken forever to build, and then you want to kind of find nails to hang that. I really feel that understanding in this instance of the kind of struggles of the social movements who've been trying to have access to a universal right, to healthcare, would really be the starting point, right? You understand what are all those contentious issues, of what's not available, right? And why people don't have well-being and good health. So that would be a starting point to then think about what to do with data architectures, what to do about the AI, where is the bias? Maybe we need a positive and affirmative bias to solve certain problems. So you build an AI that's actually biased so that you can reach many more Black people, you can reach many more women, right? So I really think that you have to start with the use case and build out from there by consulting people. This is, again, a small quip. Long ago, someone said all infrastructure is gendered. And there's a very interesting story. People said there was a village where a lot of women died at childbirth. And they wondered what was wrong. They said the drinking water, is it, something they're eating? And they realized that the road from the village to the hospital was not good. And so it took forever for the women to get to the hospital. So these are, I think, small snippets, but worthwhile remembering.
Yes, thank you. It was such a great question to end on, and just sort of to wrap up, because we're at time now, I guess I would add from my perspective, the reason I invited both Anita and Maxigas, I'm so glad they said yes to our session, was because I think that this is actually really well distilled on Anita's last slide, that, you know, the effect of these designs, these technical designs, are real and material and bear directly, not indirectly, on human rights. And so these designs are not inevitable. And so hopefully this inspires us to pay attention now, and maybe it seeds research both here and elsewhere. But I really am I'm happy that we were all able to meet around this today. And thanks so much to both Anita and Maxigas. Thank you all for sticking around till the very end. And hopefully we can take further discussion to the list if folks have that. And yeah, I would love to keep the discussion going. So have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.